Hi, I'm Chris. I'm the founder director of Biointegrity. We are so technologically centric, we have kind of missed the point about the value of the other life on our planet. I want to show you this biospheric climate solution. The biggest ideas of this biospheric climate solution is about restoring the integrity of other life and life systems on our planet, number one, but also advancing our technologies, our industries, our economies, our way of life out of the human-centric paradigm we have now into a biosphere Earth-centric paradigm, an other life-centric paradigm. That's not because we care more about the other life. That's because we have to have that composition of other life to sustain us. It is about us. The main idea here is the sponge. This is the thing to keep in mind. When you see a vegetated ecosystem, it is a utility for the climate solution on numerous levels. And that's what we're going to talk about. The biospheric climate solution is about all life, but this particular presentation is really showing you that forests are the name of the game. They move the most moisture through the air. That's an enormous aspect of the climate system. That stimulates rainfall and cools the air and cools the surface of the planet. And all those things are required to maintain biological productivity. Forests are doing all that. What you see in the bottom right here is the global forest system. So in 2018, the UN science body on climate change said we have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 28 billion metric tons per year, starting in the year 2030. And we have to do that at the rate of about 53 billion metric tons per year, starting in 2050. And the biospheric carbon sink can exceed that and provide most of that solution. So we need to remove 28. We could get up to 37. We can maintain that 37 through 2050. And by the end of the century, we could have 86% of the reductions we need to stop and reverse climate change. And this is all by focusing on the land carbon system. How fast? This study from 2020 tells us that the first 50% of this total absorption happens in the first 20 years. So we're in a crisis right now. We need the next 20 years to be exceptionally good for biosphere Earth and the climate system. And that's exactly how this fits in. What I'm going to show you are 10 strategies to combine for this massive emissions reduction potential. The first two are in relation to the Glasgow Forests and Lands Declaration that was made in November at the last International Climate Conference. And then the bottom 8, starting with improving cattle feed, are about fixing the agricultural system in low-cost ways that just improve the productivity of the system. So when you look at the first two items on the list, Glasgow and Glasgow, this is ending deforestation in 137 countries and establishing ecosystem restoration on 711 million acres of degraded forests and wetlands. That's what was committed to in 2021 to occur by 2030. And then you look at all this stuff we can do to improve the food system. We can reduce the wastes associated with the food system. We can shift to plant-based diets. We can improve the way we manage the manures and the nutrients. We can improve rice cultivation and cattle feed so that it is healthier. And then we can really focus on the soil carbon sequestration. And then in the bottom right-hand box there, you'll see that to get to this negative 28, if you add all these things up, we have 132.5% of the total. When I sent this around to some conservation biology rock stars that I know, they sort of pointed out that we don't know where the overlap is between these two things. It's possible that the ending deforestation in 137 countries is somehow wrapped into the agricultural stuff here. And it's also highly likely that 100% of people won't stop eating beef in the next 7 years. So if you remove the deforestation benefit and you just assume that somehow that's wrapped into this greater total here, that's still about 120% of the solution we need this decade. If you eliminate the idea that we're going to stop eating beef and just keep things kind of the way they are, that we get to about 104% of the solution we need. If you take them both out, we get to about 91% of the solution we need, all through non-technological means, just through better practices and figuring out the economics to stop deforestation and restore ecosystems. This is not a question of whether or not nature can do it. It's a question of whether or not we can advance our economics fast enough to accommodate what nature does for us. So over the next 80 years, this idea of restoring the most productive, most biodiverse lands around the most bioproductive biodiverse lands is the most powerful study I've seen in terms of total potential greenhouse gas removals. If we were to maintain the remaining natural ecosystems that are carbon rich and then restore 30% of the most degraded, most valuable landscapes, we could mitigate about 71% of the extinctions that are predicted this century. We could sequester about 50% of all of the carbon dioxide emissions that have been put into the atmosphere in the last 250 years or so. The basic idea here is that we are talking about the tropical forest system and everything around it. And the restoration of that integrity in the tropics is our most powerful way to address the greatest scale and number of needs. It's not just about the tropics. It's about fixing agriculture, stopping deforestation, and restoring the land biosphere. And again, the range is anywhere from about 91% of the solution we need to over 130% of the solution we need. So carbon absorption potential from fixing agriculture, stopping deforestation, and restoring 711 million acres of agricultural lands is that we could be well out of the climate crisis by 2050. There are many additional opportunities. So that's carbon. All that is just carbon. Let's talk about cooling. We basically just talked about a form of cooling that is emissions reduction. Protecting nature avoids greenhouse gas emissions and maintains the ability of ecosystems to continuously grow and absorb additional greenhouse gases every year. But there's also a physical cooling that comes from these forest systems. So forests are already cooling the planet about 0.5 degrees Celsius, and they could add an additional 0.5 degree Celsius cooling by the end of this century if we protect and restore the system. And just to emphasize the point, this is showing the physical cooling provided by land vegetation. Obviously at the equator, the sun is hottest. On the right, though, you see land surface temperature. Even though the equator is tremendously hotter than the Pacific Northwest, the temperature differential is only about 2.1x. Why is this happening? It's happening because when rains fall, the precipitation is absorbed into the tissue of the soils and the plants. But then as things heat back up, the plants release that moisture, and the same thing with the soil. This is incredibly powerful in forest systems. This layering of all these different leaves moves moisture around at massive scale. This radically affects the temperature. So this is showing that if you see in the blue box there, the forest temperature is around 84 degrees Fahrenheit and the asphalt temperature is around 120 degrees Fahrenheit. So this is a differential of nearly 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Technology just can't recreate the sponge. So the cooling potential of the planet and the carbon reduction potential of the planet are mighty this century by focusing on the life systems and forests in particular. What most people don't know, including myself until very recently, as this, intense researcher guy, is that vegetation creates precipitation. All living things love moisture. All living things have to have moisture inside of their bodies or they won't live anymore. But vegetation is also really good at holding moisture. And so you get in the tropics in particular, you get these dramatic moisture movement things that look like clouds at ground level. Just moisture moving through the air provided by the sponge. And it's a self-regulated service. This self-regulation is the closest thing we're going to find to a silver bullet to the climate problem and other problems we have. And so land vegetation is regulating its environment and collaborating with the other creatures in its environment to make it as comfortable as possible. Once it's established, the life in an ecosystem will continue to compound in these values of over decades, centuries, and even millennia. And this is something we cannot control, we cannot build, we can only nurture and protect and allow. And again, that's an economic question. How do we get out of the way of what the natural systems on our planet want to do? As we have grown, there weren't even 1 billion people on Earth in 1800, and we'll hit 8 billion next year. So as we've grown, we have developed economically and fragmented and destroyed ecosystems in ways that we thought would be okay, but it's not. It's a bad idea. If you think of your body as a system, the lymphatic system in your body is what moves moisture around. And so this fragmentation and destruction of ecosystems is equivalent to destroying the lymphatic system, the moisture circulation system in your body. These services can be restored quickly. It is a good thing to regrow the ecosystems on our planet. By doing that, you can restore the lymphatic system of planet Earth. And the most important elements of that, you could think of it as the largest pieces of that, are the forests on land. That's irrigation. It is self-managing. It is the only resource we have for reversing drought, which is a critical crisis today. Lastly, let's talk about circulation. The atmosphere of the planet is one contiguous entity. And again, this 300 million years of trees on Earth and stomata circulating moisture is the most influential aspect of how we get circulation of moisture over our lands. It also is extremely influential on circulation of moisture around the entire planet. And so cutting to the chase here, if we continue deforestation in the tropics, we will increase the likelihood of drought in North America. The other side of this is that deforestation can cause flooding in other parts of the world, just as it causes drought and wildfire. We can regrow the system to retemperatize the weather. It's the only resource we have for doing that. So moving into the final section here, if we shift now to focusing the climate solution on the restoration of the life integrity of our planet, this is the most exciting, comprehensive, fail-safe, and necessary response to this climate and biosphere crisis that we're in today. Exciting because we're talking about making life more abundant, making Earth more beautiful, creating more relationships. And we need biocentric solutions because we are in extreme crisis now. This study from 2021 is showing that less than 3% of lands on Earth are still considered intact wildernesses. And the majority of those wildernesses are the interior of Greenland and the northern Canadian forests. The good news is we can regrow leaf area really quickly, especially in the tropics. And this will restore the moisture balancing and carbon absorption functions from local to global scale as the ecosystems mature and compound in value. The big picture is the tree cover stabilizes climate. Putting this life system at the center of all of our human activities and calling on the wealthiest institutions and entities to invest in new economics that stop these problems, that advance biospheric continuation. This is the most important thing we can do now. And so we need to finance forever ecosystems and biospheric economies and economics, which connect and restore an abundant future on Earth. Check out the Value of Biosphere Earth series. The biosphere is entangled with the climate system. This has been Biospheric Climate Solution. Thank you for watching, and please support biointegrity.